Okay, so this goes back all the way to the beginning of my junior year of high school. So me and my cousin went to school together and we were always late. School started around 7:55 and we would always get there around 8:05. So eventually the office lady told our moms that they needed to start dropping us off early. And by early, she meant like at 7 a.m. Starting September 1st, we had to show up to school at 7 a.m. Fast forward a while later and it's the day before September 1st. Me and my cousin were talking about how bad we wanted Burger King. So I told my cousin, hey, like I'm gonna bring some money tomorrow. And I think 55 minutes is enough time for like us to walk to Burger King and then walk back to school. Mind you, we live in a really small town. So then fast forward to the next day and my tia drops us off at school. We got out the car and she started driving away. She turned onto a different road and we couldn't see her car anymore, so we started walking to Burger King. And it was all going great until we had to cross the busiest street in our small town. To make it even worse, that road is where all the trailers drive on. So we're standing at the crosswalk and we're getting ready to cross. As me and my cousin were crossing the street, I look to my left and I see a car coming right at us. My heart dropped and I thought I was going to die. That's when it hit us. And all I saw was my cousin flying into the air. And then I went rolling onto the hood. After that, I fell on the road and when I opened my eyes, everything was gray and blurry. And there was like this buzzing sound in my ears. I turned to my right and I seen my cousin laying down on the floor, and I thought she was dead. Somehow I managed to stand up and I began walking towards her. That's when I saw the guy who hit us come out of his car and he was bawling his eyes out, and then some random guy also came out of nowhere and he called 911. After that, the ambulance, fire, and police department arrived and we had to do the worst thing of all. Call our parents. At the time, my dad was already at work, my mom was getting ready, and then my cousin's parents were also getting ready for work. When I called my mom, I told her I got hit by a car and she was pissed. But guess what she did? She took a shower before even coming to check up on me. But anyways, both my mom and my tia were pissed at both of us. After that, the school security guard came to check up on us, and by that time, me and my cousin had no choice but to go back to school. So we did, and by that time, everyone already knew what happened.
Story time about how I'm still engaged after 16 years. My fiance asked me to marry him when I was 20 years old and I am now 36. It's been that long. Disclaimer, is not my story time. I've sent me an Instagram. Let's call my fiance Ted. Ted is a great guy, aside from the fact that he pushes back our wedding day all the time. A little backstory. We are both very career-driven people. We both work very hard and travel for our jobs. He works on Wall Street and I work for a beauty conglomerate. We're very wealthy, so we could be having kids right now if we wanted to. But of course, he says that we should wait until we get married. Every time I bring up the fact that we still haven't gotten married after 16 years, he gets annoyed and upset. Worst of all, we barely spend time together because we both work so much. I started getting really suspicious because of how many times he's pushed back the wedding. So I decided to do some research. When we first got engaged, he told me the ring was worth $45,000. I got it appraised and it turns out it's a fake ring. And it's only worth $200. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how I'm still engaged after 16 years. After I found out the ring was fake, I came up with a plan to confront my fiance. I made sure to get home earlier than he did. When he came into the apartment, I was standing right by our balcony. He comes over to me and gives me a kiss. Then I take off the engagement ring and I throw it over the balcony. He pretended like he was freaking out. That's when I told him I got the ring appraised and that it was a fake, and that it was only worth $200 instead of the $45,000 he told me he spent. The man was too stunned to speak. I could tell he was trying to come up with some lie in his head, so I gave him a minute to think. Then he says that he bought the ring from a friend who's a jeweler, and that he must have scammed him out of the $45,000. After 45 minutes of arguing, I was exhausted. I decided to go to sleep. I woke up a few hours later and I overhear him on the phone. That's when I heard him say she knows that the ring is fake and I think she knows about us. Part 3 is up. Part 3 of how I'm still engaged after 16 years. That's when I hear my fiance on the phone saying, I think she knows about us. My heart sank to my stomach. I stood there and listened to the rest of the conversation. He was whispering, so it was hard to make out. All I could hear was, I'll have to tell her the truth now. I went back to our room and pretended to be asleep. He comes in and wakes me up and tells me that he has to talk to me. That's when he starts telling me everything. He said when he asked me to marry me, he had every intention of doing so. But the more he traveled, the further he felt away from me. That's when he told me he met someone in his travels, and that he'd been seeing this woman for 10 years. He even had a house with her in a different city. It turns out that every time he would travel, it was only to see her. My world was completely shattered. Worst of all is that he was so happy after he told me. He moved out that week and now I am totally alone. I gave him the best years of my life and my time was totally wasted. I feel like he should be punished for this, but I don't think he broke any laws. What should I do?
I stole my then best friend's wedding cake the day of the wedding. My 28 female, best friend 31 female was supposed to have her wedding in mid-January. It was scheduled to be a very lavish wedding, the theme being blue because she didn't want to have white on white with the snow. My best friend was being quite a bridezilla the days leading up to her wedding, and bridezilla is not quite the word for the day of. My task, of course, was going to be something simple for someone who had done so much to help me. Her words. This task was very much not simple. The drive to the bakery was a 45-minute trip each way, and the bride suggested I drive slowly to avoid the cake being messed up. So I would have to take a separate route, which would end up being around an hour and 15 minutes on the trip back with the cake. I got up bright and early at 6 a.m. and began the trip shortly thereafter. By the time I got back to the venue with the hotels everyone was staying in, it was about 9 o'clock. So, as I'm unloading the cake, the bride's mom starts to look uneasy. I thought it was because it was freezing outside, but she called over my best friend and she went absolutely berserk. Well, somehow, she failed to inform the cake decorator that she would like the cake to be a matching blue color as well. How does one forget to do this? She adamantly denied that she forgot to inform the decorator of the color, but this was only one of many other grievances from the bride that were her own fault, that she very much blew up at and did not acknowledge that they were her fault. My best friend got all up in my face and told me I needed to go back ASAP. I obliged. I made the trip back to the decorator and profusely apologized as I explained the situation. Apparently no big deal on a big wedding day for someone else and a slow day for cake decorator. I FaceTimed with my friend the whole time so she could see how everything was going. She seemed very pleased over the phone and said it was perfect. I paid for the touch-up on the cake out of pocket and left. I got back to the venue at around 12 o'clock. My friend saw the cake being set up and immediately blew up once again. She accused me of swapping out the cake she had seen over the call for a different version. She didn't even let me get one more word in as she backed me into my car seat and made other people pack the cake in the back. She told me to come back with the correct cake or I would just be cut from the wedding. I took my chances and just drove home. I put my phone on silent and ate the cake with my boyfriend and our families. Nobody knows the real story of why I had a wedding cake randomly on a Sunday night for dinner except for my boyfriend, and I don't feel guilty.
I accidentally walk into the men's restroom. All I see is a urinal with red liquid in it. So I'm like, wrong restroom, first of all. Second of all, whatever that is looks like a type of disease I don't want to be around. And I scream out, oh my God, this is the wrong restroom. The man turns around. I swiftly get out because I'm like, you know what? I can't be seen. This is too embarrassing. I rush to the parking lot. I'm trying to leave as soon as possible. I don't want to make no eye contact. In a moment of weakness in my life, I decided to buy a mamalona. It's very difficult to get out of the parking lot with a big truck, especially when people besides you can't park. So I'm blocked in there. I'm trying to reverse, go back in, reverse, go back in. And now this is a bigger scene because now I have a huddle of compas trying to help me get out. At this point, I'm fighting tears and I'm just like hoping and praying that the guy in the bathroom doesn't come out. And he comes out and it's the car next to me.
Am I the bad apple for explicitly telling my son not to share his food with his friend? My son Gregory is 13 years old and he just began 8th grade. His best friend Peter, also 13. Last year, I noticed that Gregory would be ravenously hungry after school. Peter was being sent to school every day with no lunch. Looks to me like a typical case of neglectful and unfit parents. I felt terrible for Peter, so I decided to discreetly begin giving Gregory more and more food each day, just about doubling his food. I was never thanked for this by anyone, but I knew Peter was eating the food I sent. This year though, things are different. Money's tighter for personal reasons, and I've decided to not spend an exuberant amount of money supporting someone else's child. I sat Gregory down and told him I'd be packing him one lunch, which is for him and him alone. I made it extremely clear, do not share with anyone, and that includes Peter.